The phone wasn't mine, but it trembled against my thigh like a trapped sparrow, wings beating a frantic rhythm at 3:17 a.m., carving lines of light into the dark bedroom through the notification bloom on her lock screen. The name was hidden, just a heart and an initial, but the message didn't hide its hunger. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, baby. Miss you so much, face blowing a kiss. The word baby didn't belong to me anymore. It unzipped something warm in my chest and let winter in, dry and sudden and absolute. My wife of 10 years, Molly, was turned away from me, shoulders tucked under the duvet, breath shallow, as if even her sleep knew guilt and wore it like a damp shirt. I should have nudged her awake, should have asked quietly who, should have tested the house for how quickly it burned when two people told the truth at once. Instead, an eerie calm skinned my rage and pinned it to the wall like a moth, a stillness I didn't recognize in myself, like standing in a church after the congregation has gone, relics humming with old prayers. I slid her phone closer, saw the open preview, the heart's red mouth, the mockery of softness, and typed with thumbs that didn't feel like mine. Tomorrow, what time should I expect you? I set the phone back as if it were a live wire and froze, my pulse counting the distance between who I had been at midnight and who I was becoming at 3:18. The reply came fast, too fast, like a kiss delivered in public because secrets make people careless. Molly stirred, groped for the phone, and the screen lit her face in sick aquarium blue. I watched through half-lids as her expression broke, eyes widening, breath snagging, fingers failing the choreography of lies as the phone clattered onto the hardwood with a sharp, guilty consonant. She sat up hard, and for a beat I could smell her shampoo, the citrus I'd bought because she said it made her mornings feel cleaner, safer, like sunlight. Pa Paul, she said, my name ripped in half, the halves failing to find each other in the dark, and I pretended to wake with the clumsy limbs of a man still allowed to be naive. What's wrong? I asked, my voice gentle enough it felt obscene, and she whispered, nothing, just a bad dream, too quickly, the words like pebbles thrown at a window she didn't want opened. She scooped the phone off the floor and escaped into the bathroom, the lock clicking with a crisp, final sound that made my chest hollow out like a house being walked through by strangers. That lock was a verdict dressed as wood and metal. The verdict was what I had pretended not to know in the long fog of late nights and deadlines, with no bodies, mute calls under the shower spray, curtains turned ever so slightly to avoid streetlight truth. The confirmation didn't feel like a blow. It felt like the absence of one, a refusal of pain to behave like pain, an ache that looked at me with someone else's eyes. She came back pale as paper, tremor riding her hands, eyes red-rimmed like she'd sprinted underwater and run out of air at the door. We need to talk, she said, and the phrase made something inside me laugh. The worst things in life always arrive wearing those four plain words, like a knife wrapped in napkins. Who is he? I asked, and even I was surprised at how flat my voice was, a lake in winter, the fish slow and still beneath. She swallowed, silence dilating until it made a room of its own, and then, David, a name lowered like a crate onto a dock, heavy, splintering, enough sound to attract birds. I knew him, the new project manager, magnetic in the way cheap magnets stick to every fridge, his voice always a degree warmer when he said my wife's name at company events, his hand always orbiting places men's hands shouldn't orbit unless invited with vows. Over an hour she told me the ungodly ordinary details no one should ever become fluent in. Work dinners that weren't work, hotels that smelled like new carpet and singed sugar, stolen mornings, where our marriage existed as a ghost outside a window. She cried the way people cry when the dam they built turns out to be made of curtains. She begged, offered words like bandages, but words have adhesive limits. I didn't shout. Rage in me had gone subterranean, a river cutting rock where no one can watch, and I told her to pack a bag and go before daylight mocked us both. When she left, she looked back the way people look back at accidents they caused and can't properly name. The door closed, and the silence afterward was elastic, stretched between every room until it made music no one could dance to. I walked the house like a stranger touring a life for sale, pillows, mugs, the dent in the sofa where her body taught the cushions to expect her. Under the calm, something sharpened, a quiet, legal coldness that wanted facts, wanted leverage, wanted consequence. The intention was crude but clean. I wanted truth to have teeth strong enough to leave marks on more than my heart. I brewed coffee I didn't drink and stared at the steam, as if it could scry me a softer future. Then I opened my laptop and found policy documents. Our company's HR portal sang its hymn about ethics and boundaries and fraternization like a bored choir. I took notes, gathered timestamps, curated screenshots that had arrived on my thigh like a confession misaddressed by God. An anonymous report flowed out of me without tremor. Dates, names, the way their calendar invites braided like vines strangling a trellis we'd built together. When the confirmation email arrived, it felt less like revenge than like physics. What falls must break unless someone intercedes with mercy, and Mercy had not once texted my phone at 3:17 a.m. But policy wasn't enough. A second intention flickered up, darker and more honest. I wanted him to look at me and remember the shape of the husband of the woman he'd chosen to be a verb with. I thought of David's wife, Emily, Christmas party small talk, a laugh that pealed like bells trying very hard to be festive, a hand on his forearm that trusted muscle memory more than the man. I found her online, the quiet domestic constellation of school pickup photos and soup recipes, and a porch swing reflecting sunsets it didn't earn. I sent her screenshots that made my hands shake, even though shaking felt too sentimental for what this was. I told her I was sorry to be the messenger, because that's the lie messengers tell to make their own feet lighter. I expected chaos. Instead, what came back was a single, steel sentence. "Thank you for telling me," and the world shifted an inch toward a moral geometry I could understand. I slept for an hour like a man who had buried something and wasn't sure whether it was a body or a seed. When morning fully arrived, the house wore a new light, thinner, honest, uninterested in forgiving sofas or mugs. My phone buzzed and I flinched, as if text itself had grown fangs. It was Molly. A long message made of broken glass and gauze, apologies that used my name like a ladder she hoped I'd hold steady while she climbed out of her own burning building. I didn't reply. Not because I was cruel, but because silence sometimes is the only syntax that holds under weight this heavy. I stepped into the shower and let the water beat my shoulders like a correction, like a drum teaching my ribs a new rhythm that didn't include her. Outside the bathroom window, the neighborhood woke up with awful innocence, sprinklers ticking, a dog coughing at a bird, a child dragging a backpack too loud for 7:30 a.m., and I stood there and learned how to breathe as a man singular again. Open loops yawned around me. The HR process, Emily's next move, the shape of Molly's new life, the particular texture of a confrontation with David I could already smell. Stale beer bar varnish, the sour sugar of spilled cocktails and lies denatured under neon. I dried off and looked at my face, which had not changed, and hated it for that betrayal of appearances. There is a moment in every disaster when the protagonist realizes no one is coming to rescue anything. The only thing left to do is catalog ghosts and choose which ones will get names. I chose one. David, and I wrote his name down where I could see it, not because ink matters, but because intention needs a body before it can stand up and walk. HR moves with a strange patience, like a snake digesting, and in that slow-turning machinery, I learned the art of waiting with purpose, of building small domes of order around the crater. Work emails stuttered, then thinned. Our team was temporarily reassessing leadership structures, which is how companies say someone's chair is suddenly a memory. In the stale, fluorescent afternoon of a Tuesday, a quiet rumor wove itself through cubicles like incense. David had been asked to take leave pending investigation, a phrase that felt like a polite noose. By Friday, he was gone. Clean desk, emptied drawers, the little potted fern on his window ledge left behind like a green question no one wanted to water. The night after he left, Emily emailed me. No flourishes, no theatrical punctuation, just a set of coordinates and a time, a cafe none of us had ever cared about before because fate had not yet needed it. I went because some decencies must be paid in person, even when the currency is grief. She arrived with her hair pinned back in a way that said she'd done it without mirrors, her hands steady the way mine used to be before 3:17 a.m. "I'm not here to attack you," she said before I could ruin the moment by apologizing for everything in the world I could not control. We spoke plain. Dates, hotels, the peculiar cruelty of how cheaters learn the calendar of a marriage before they desecrate it. She told me she'd already asked David to leave, that he had cried with a sincerity that didn't move her because sincerity is a currency counterfeiters learned to print long before him. When she said "my boys," I realized there were children, 2, 7, and 5, and the room tilted a little because pain that leaks into small shoes should be illegal everywhere. I told her what I knew and didn't know. We agreed on nothing like friends and everything like survivors. On the walk back to my car, the air felt too wide, the afternoon too clean for what it now contained. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel as if it were a compass refusing to admit north. That night, I dug into the kind of quiet where men decide what kind of men they will be next. Therapy had a Tuesday opening. I took it because love had turned out to be a muscle and mine had torn. The therapist's office was painted the color of unburned bread. There were plants that had learned how to forgive windows. "How do you want this story to end?" she asked, and it made me laugh because endings were the only thing I could no longer imagine without tasting metal. "Not with me becoming him," I said, and my voice found a floor it hadn't had in weeks. I told her about the confrontation I wanted, neon and bitterness, the precise geometry of seats at a bar where a man like David couldn't pretend his life wasn't a wrecked train. She didn't tell me not to go. She asked what I wanted from it that pain hadn't already delivered to my door. The answer formed in the air and floated down like ash. A mirror, placed so he could not look away. Revenge wasn't a plan. It was a posture I wore in my bones to keep them from collapsing. I waited 2 days, then texted him from a number he didn't have, the message brief and ungarnished. I'll be at Harker's on 9th at 8. Come face me or spend the rest of your life flinching at shadows that look like me. The read receipt lit up. There are men who can't resist a summons because bravado puts a leash around their throat and walks them to their own trial. Harker's smelled like varnish and the soft catastrophe of former laughter. The bartender wiped circles into what a century had taught not to tell secrets. David arrived in a jacket that fit like he still believed he belonged in rooms. His eyes found me and then fled to the bottles, the way you look at something that cannot judge you. He sat one stool away, cowardice's favorite distance. I shifted down to erase the space because mercy has never impressed me when it's applied to men like him. Enjoy your drink, I asked, and the sarcasm tasted medicinal, a bitter I'd earned. He said my name like it might explode. He said sorry like he was feeding a stray dog polite scraps. I leaned in, elbows on wood that remembered men's elbows longer than their vows, and told him plain, you took something that wasn't yours, and when I say that, I don't mean her body. I mean my ordinary life, my unremarkable trust, my right to ache for small reasons. The bar hushed the way rooms hush when stories become too specific to ignore. His face flushed because shame has always been a good makeup artist when given the right light. He tried to say it had been a mistake. I reminded him mistakes are misdialed numbers, not 18 months of hotel check-ins that learned your names. I told him he'd lost his job because a company's ethics page had more spine than he did. I didn't strike him. The words did what fists can't. They curated an exhibit and made him tour it. When I stood to go, he reached, stopped, let his hand fall. Even gravity knew what he didn't deserve. Outside, the air folded around me with a curious lightness, as if leaving him behind had made room for oxygen I'd been rationing. In the weeks that followed, grief did what grief does, came in waves that looked ordinary from far away but slammed bone when you stood in them. I built a schedule like scaffolding around a bruised cathedral. Gym, work, therapy, prayers said to a ceiling I didn't believe in but needed to hear my voice under. Friends reappeared with food and jokes and the kind of silence that says I'm here, translate me however you must. Then Molly texted, long paragraphs arranged like a bouquet of thorns. She said she'd lost everything, job, apartment, friends who had learned how to choose daylight over drama. She asked to talk, not to repair, she promised, but to apologize where my eyes could say whether they believed her. The therapist asked what I wanted from that room. I said closure, then admitted I didn't know what the word meant beyond wanting the past to stop tapping on my window at night. We set a boundary. Public space 1 hour, no old photos brought like weapons wrapped in nostalgia. Cafe summers are loud with milk steam and the clink of cups telling each other about heat. When Molly walked in, she was 10 pounds lighter and 10 years older, which is a math grief does generously. I'm sorry, she said quickly, hands flattened on the table as if restraining them from begging, and I nodded because there are only so many ways to say that sentence before it spills and stains. She told me about the sobering loneliness after the fireworks burnout, about the terrible math of wanting and having and losing in the same breath. I listened, not because I owed her my ears, but because surrendering them felt like a way to reclaim my mouth. When she asked if forgiveness was possible, I learned a new honesty in myself. Maybe someday, but not for us, only for me, I said, and the words sat between us like clean dishes after a long, dirty meal. We parted with a strange blessing, two people who had once shared every weather now sharing the forecast without stepping outside together. That night, I deleted her messages, ritual matters, and I needed the small cathedral of an emptied thread. In the silence that followed, a question sharpened again, the loop refusing to close. If I had the chance to reply to that 3:17 a.m. text, the one she meant for him, what would I have said that could have rerouted the whole river? The answer arrived like lightning chooses a tree, not to her, but to him, through her, words meant to scorch the bridge and light the banks so everyone could see what burned. I didn't have that chance then. But fate, obstinate and theatrical, wasn't done with me. It happened on a morning that pretended to be kind, blue sky buttoned all the way up, birds busy with small gossip in the hedges, coffee perfuming the kitchen like a lie told by a friend who loves you anyway. A number I didn't recognize pinged my phone, and the preview line dragged a blade across the old scar. Can't wait to feel your hands on me again, baby. For a second I thought my nervous system was an echo chamber, looping old ghosts. Then I opened it and saw her name at the end, the sign-off that had always been ours. She'd sent it to me, not him. Misfire, glitch, or the universe performing petty justice, who could say? The body has its own voting mechanisms. Mine voted to shake, but the mind, newly muscled by therapy and nights spent sober with truth, voted to be cold. There it was, a door back into a fire I had survived, opening like it had paid rent on my mornings. The old me would have fumbled, would have called, would have begged the moment to be smaller. The man I was now wiped the screen clean with a slow thumb and began to write. Nasty is a word people fling like a tomato, but it felt like craftsmanship in my hands, like carving a message from a plank drifted in on storm tide. I didn't go for profanity, filth would have flattered what they had. I went for precision, the kind of sentence that lives behind the eyes when flicked on in a dark room. Return this to your AP, I typed first, and tell him it's stamped insufficient funds. You spent every last ounce of your honesty overdrawing our future. My thumbs hesitated, then gathered a colder mercy. Also tell him the HR department now operates on Eastern Time and divine wrath. He'll want to check his inbox before lunch. I let it breathe, then added the mirror. One more thing, you texted the man who kept your vows for you when you forgot where you left them. Send. The message went with the sound of a paper plane choosing a window and making it. Almost immediately 3 dots appeared, rose, fell, rose again, like someone doing compressions on a corpse that didn't consent to resuscitation. Her reply was a tangle of apologies and a reflexive lie. That wasn't what it looked like, which is the national anthem of people who have run out of new songs. I didn't engage. Instead, I forwarded the screenshot to Emily with a short line. You said once you prefer the whole picture. Her response came hours later and contained only what mattered. Got it. Protect your peace. Protect your peace, 4 words that felt like someone handing me a coat before I stepped into weather that did not care if I had skin. By afternoon, the old anxiety had burn marks where the new resolve kept setting it down. I walked long blocks, long breaths, the city's noise a mechanical lullaby. In a window I passed, I saw my reflection and didn't flinch as much as I'd expected. He looked like a man who had learned where his edges were without slicing anyone new. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was David from a number I shouldn't have been surprised he had. You've made your point, he wrote, as if points were furniture that could be rearranged to make rooms cozier. I answered with the only liturgy I still believed in. The point is not a point, it's a place. Stand in it and look around. No reply. Silence expanded in the hours that followed, but it felt like a field left fallow on purpose. That night I slept, which is to say I traveled to the place where the body stops pretending to be a person and just is the animal it always was. Days stacked. Grief didn't leave. It learned to keep its elbows to itself at the table. Therapy pried open a quieter question behind the spectacle of betrayal. Who had I been before love made me fluent in someone else's weather? I started cooking again, not for 2, not pretending recipes are prayers, just for heat and taste and the science of becoming edible. Friends invited me to a Saturday baseball game. I went and felt the strange holiness of meaningless statistics performed under sunlight. Then, as if fate wanted curtain calls, Molly asked to see me one last time, to return a few things. She said books, a sweater that remembered my shoulders the way hands do. The appointment was a trap I recognized and walked into anyway, because closure isn't a door, it's a decision made on a threshold. She arrived at my porch with a box, and the eyes of someone who had discovered the hard way that desire is a poor landlord. We stood there, 2 ghosts auditioning for roles in a play neither of us could produce again. I read your message, she said, voice soft, as if loudness might break something already dust. It hurt, she added, and I nodded, because accuracy should be honored even when it asks to sit where love used to. I wanted you to hurt, I said, not as a weapon, but as a testimony entered into the record. She swallowed a handful of seconds and looked past me into the house, at the couch, at the table, at the light. This was home, she said. It was, I answered, and the past tense did what it always does. Pin the butterfly to the page gently enough that you could still see its shimmer. She handed me the box, a sweater, the books I'd underlined in blue, a single photo face down, which I did not flip over. Goodbye, Paul, she said, giving my name back like a borrowed cup. Goodbye, Molly, I said, and shut the door with a softness I would have been proud of if softness were the point. In the kitchen, I put the box on the table and made tea because rituals are scaffolding, and I was still learning how to stand without the old walls. The phone buzzed again, an email this time. HR confirming closure of the investigation and thanking me for my commitment to integrity, a phrase that felt like someone handing me a medal made of cardboard that still meant something. I stared at the words until they blurred into simple light. That night, sleep stitched itself to me without argument, and for the first time since the text that broke my life, I dreamed in color that wasn't emergency red. Morning arrived with rain, the good kind, that sounds like an apology no one actually owes you. I brewed coffee and watched it beat on the window, and in that soft percussion I heard another open-loop hum. What would healing look like if I stopped narrating it to myself as a triumph and let it be the ordinary miracle it was? The question warmed the room like a second kettle set to boil. A month later, I went back to Harker's, not because I needed ghosts, but because sometimes returning to a scene without bleeding is its own sacrament. The bartender remembered my order. Memory is a kindness bar's practice when they're tired of being confessional booths. I took the same stool and felt nothing drain from me, a victory so small and clean it didn't need a ribbon. A couple laughed 3 seats down. Their future hadn't made any decisions yet, and I found that I did not envy them. My phone lay face down. I had learned that light is not always your friend. It vibrated anyway, the low burr of news trying to exist. I flipped it and there it was, not from Molly this time, but from David, an apology that had been lifting weights. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote, "but I need you to know I'm done lying. I'm in a program. I've hurt more people than I counted. I hope your life is good, even if mine isn't." I considered the gift of not replying and gave it eagerly. In therapy, I said the sentence out loud and waited for lightning. None arrived. "Sometimes the best reply is the person you become," my therapist said, and I found myself wanting to write that on the inside of my wrist, where once there had been a watch that always told someone else's time. The world went on: trash days, grocery lists, a coworker's birthday cake that tasted like a compromise everyone agreed to. On a Sunday, I met a friend's friend at a small gallery where the paintings seemed to have been done with thumbs, color smudged into confession. Her name was Ray, and her laugh was a low bell rung by wind. We talked like people who don't want to perform, about bread and bridges, and the way some songs find your spine without asking. When she asked what I did not say survivor of a particular story. I said my job and then asked about hers. We didn't make promises, we made coffee. We didn't say forever, we said next Wednesday. And my heart, which had been a fist inside my chest for months, unclenched enough to let the blood take the long way around. On the walk home, evening settled over the city with the elegance of a coat drop, and I realized that joy had been waiting politely at the door this whole time. In the weeks that followed, Molly reached out once more with a message that was less begging and more biography. She'd found a new place. She was working 2 jobs. She had joined a group that made hard admissions under bad strip lights and drank bad coffee together. I read it and felt the complicated mercy of human beings continuing to shape themselves out of their worst choices. I wished her the kind of peace that didn't need my presence to qualify. Then I put the phone away and went to meet Ray under a sky that had decided just then to perform a sunset that made strangers call each other to the window. One night, months after the first text detonated my life, I found the courage to open the photo she'd left face down in the box. It was from our early years, 2 people innocent enough to believe innocence is a contract instead of a gift. I didn't cry. I set it back down gently and realized that gentleness toward artifacts of the past is not the same as surrender to them. The last open loop closed without ceremony on a Tuesday morning at 9:12 a.m. A notification popped, a calendar invite I hadn't deleted, anniversary dinner, bright and blue and thoughtless. I clicked decline, and in that small click a cathedral stood up inside my chest where a ruin had been. The day went on as if nothing holy had happened, which is how you know something holy has. Fall arrived and brought clarity with its dry light. Leaves performed their annual drama without caring who watched, and I envied them their unapologetic endings. Ray and I grew parallel, like trains that chose not to race. Sometimes our timelines met at stations, sometimes we waved from a distance and still smiled. I told her my story in pieces, out of order, the way memory prefers. She didn't try to fix it or fit it, just held the edges while I figured out whether it made a shape or a map. The map pointed somewhere that looked suspiciously like home, but with different furniture. One evening, over soup that steamed like a soft warning, Ray asked, "What would you have said if you could have replied perfectly to that first wrong text?" The question lifted the lid on a pot I had left simmering on the back burner of my mind. "I think I sent it," I said, surprised by my own certainty. Not because it hurt her, but because it told the truth about what she spent that wasn't hers. "Then maybe the story already ended," she said, "and what you're in now is an afterward." People forget how long those can be, and how beautiful. Afterward, the word made the air fragrant in a way no candle could fake. I realized then that closure hadn't been a slamming door or a trial, or even the bar's varnished wood under my elbows. Closure had been a series of small permissions given back to myself, without asking anyone else to sign. Emily emailed once more around the holidays, not an update exactly, but a kindness. "The boys are okay," she wrote. "We are okay. Thank you again for telling me when you did. I wish you a season with more light than you expect." I wrote back with something that felt like a blessing and not like a benediction. "May your house hold laughter that holds. May your nights come simple." I didn't hear from David again. I began to suspect that his absence was a gift he had accidentally wrapped correctly. Molly's presence receded to a quiet corner of the past that no longer echoed when I walked near it. The last of her clothes I had boxed months ago went to a donation center where they would be worn by new stories that owed me nothing. On a shelf in the closet, I left one sweater, a gray one, soft, anonymous, not as a shrine, but as a decoy for the mind when it goes looking for old altars to kneel at. Friendships deepened in the way they do when you bleed on them carefully and they don't flinch. Work became work again, the sacred mundanity of spreadsheets and meetings and sandwich Thursdays. In therapy, we stopped triaging and started gardening, pulling weeds whose roots had wrapped around beliefs I had never inspected, planting small, defiant joys and checking them for frost. When pain visited, it knocked. I opened, poured it tea, and didn't let it spend the night unless it promised to help with dishes. One rain-soaked Saturday, I returned to the trail where Molly and I had once ran kilometers into breathlessness. I walked it instead, listening to the river make the same sound it had always made, uncaring, devoted to its own forward motion. Halfway down, I stopped and let memory play its film. Then I pressed stop, not pause. There is a difference, and the screen inside me went legitimately dark. A hawk lifted off a branch and stitched the sky to itself with its wings. I whispered thank you to no one, which is often the truest prayer. And the open loops that used to whine like bad electricity inside my skull finally went quiet enough to let a new music through. There was no grand courtroom. There was a kitchen, a morning, a song on the radio that had learned the trick of being both sad and glad at the same time. Resolution did not arrive dressed as victory. It came as composure, as the ability to be alone inside my own decisions without reaching for a witness. The intention that had driven me, wanting truth to bite the people who chewed my life without permission, met its obstacle and moved past it like a river that finally found the sea and learned how to be salt. In its place came a quieter intention, to be a man who could hold love without making an altar of loss. Ray and I sat on the floor one evening with takeout boxes cooling into honesty, and she asked if I ever thought about texting Molly again. Sometimes, I said, the way I think about swimming after dark possible, but the water belongs to its own mysteries then. We toasted to mysteries and to mornings, and to the soft tyranny of ordinary happiness. The clink of our glasses was the smallest symbol, and it rang just long enough. Weeks later, a final coda arrived, not from a phone, but from my own mouth when a coworker asked, offhand over coffee, "How are things with Molly?" I said, "We're done," and realized there was no tremor, no theater, no need to annotate. The sentence was a stone that chose the riverbed and stayed. I walked back to my desk carrying a paper cup and a future that didn't need to be defended. That night I found the text thread, the original, the first explosion, and scrolled to the top where the world split. I read the message again, not to reopen the wound, but to admire the scar's work. My reply, the nasty one that had shocked her because it named the economy of her betrayal with accountant accuracy, no longer pulsed with voltage. It sat there like a plaque beside an exhibit that had closed. I deleted the thread. Not in anger, not as a ritual of purification, just as housekeeping. In the clean space it left, I did not meditate, I did not write a poem, I did not light a candle. I washed dishes, wiped a counter, fed myself, watered a plant, texted Ray a picture of the sky on fire above the rooftops and wrote, "Look." And somewhere in houses I no longer visit, other people continued their work, remorse, repair, relapse, return. I wished them all the grace I could afford without overdrawing my balance. The past stayed the past, not because I outlawed it, but because I stopped smuggling it into customs under my shirt. When I lay down that night, sleep came without console screensavers looping old footage. Morning brought nothing special, which is how special arrives when it's tired of applause. I poured coffee, opened a window, let in air that had never been breathed by anyone I used to be. The phone on the counter was just a phone, and in the quiet my life said, without fanfare and with good, clean sentences, proceed. And with good, clean sentences, proceed.